Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Oh, totally. It's very binary.
Right. It's like engineering. You fall, you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the black background, and then doctor just points at it with a pen and says, well, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, broken or not broken, it's clean. And honestly, it's deeply comforting. I mean, as humans, we desperately want things to be visible, to be perfectly categorized.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of human potential. You start looking at personal motivation, at why, one person builds an empire and another person with the exact same background just completely stagnates.
And suddenly that pristine X-ray machine is totally broken.
It really is. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape of the human mind that is just murky. It's chaotic.
It is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. There is no simple contrasting X-ray for why one person succeeds and another does not.
Right. You can't just
scan someone's brain and say, ah, yes, right there in the frontal lobe, you have a severe deficiency in ambition.
Which makes mapping out success incredibly difficult. But we are going to try anyway, using a really fascinating and highly specific roadmap today.
Yes, we are.
We're doing a deep dive into a text called 10 Principal Secrets of Principal People, written by Dr. PaulEnenche, MD. Now, before we really get into the weeds here, we need to set the parameters for this deep dive.
That's a good idea, yeah.
Dr. Enenche's book is fundamentally rooted in a Christian biblical framework. He relies heavily on scripture, theological concepts, and, spiritual mechanics.
He really does.
But whether you listening right now are a devout believer or you are a hardcore secular materialist, our mission today remains exactly the same. We aren't here to take sides, and we aren't here to preach the theology.
Right. We are here to reverse engineer the psychology behind his claims. We want to impartially report on the architecture of his philosophy to see what we can extract. Because embedded within this religious framework are some incredibly potent, universally applicable insights on human motivation, learning, and the mechanics of high achievement.
Just to give you a visual anchor for what we are unpacking, picture the cover of the book itself. It's a bright, almost urgent yellow background.
It really pops.
Yeah, and over on the left side, there's this gleaming golden trophy. And right in the middle, integrated directly into the title, is a red target. There is an arrow perfectly hitting the dead center, like the absolute bullseye, right inside the O of the word people.
What's fascinating here is how that imagery isn't just decorative. It perfectly encapsulates the author's entire premise.
How so?
Well, the trophy represents becoming what he calls a principal person. A principal person is someone who is an outstanding success, someone who fundamentally stands out in their generation.
Right.
But you don't get the trophy by accident, and you certainly don't get it just by wishing for it. You have to hit the target. And in the context of this book, hitting that bullseye means hitting the mark of wisdom.
Wisdom is the dividing line.
Exactly.
The author aggressively argues that wisdom, not luck, not necessarily even raw talent, is the dividing line between an outstanding success and an outstanding failure.
Which is a bold claim.
It is. So we are going to do a very detailed, granular explanation of all 10 secrets, or phases, laid out by Dr. Enenche. We're going to look at the internal spark, the cognitive grind, the social environments, and even the concept of spiritual transfer.
To see how each mechanism pulls a person closer to that target.
Yeah. And it is a highly structured progression. It isn't just a list of random tips. It builds on itself sequentially.
It really does. So where does he start?
Let's start with the very first phase, which is all about the initial spark of wisdom. The author calls this inspiration.
Okay.
And he starts by making a very sharp, almost controversial distinction between a good idea and a God idea.
Ah, right.
A good idea, he argues, might look fantastic on a spreadsheet. You can get venture capital for it, you can hire a team, but it can still completely fail.
We see that all the time.
All the time. But a God idea, however, cannot fail. He defines it as a light shining directly into a person's spirit, giving them an unfailing direction that bypasses human limitation.
Mechanically speaking, within the framework of the book, this inspiration is access to thoughts that simply do not originate with you.
Right, like an external download.
Exactly. It is a connection to a higher realm of problem solving. The author is suggesting that the human intellect, operating strictly on its own, is capped.
It hits a ceiling.
Right. It maxes out at good ideas. But by tapping into a divine source, one bypasses those cognitive limitations entirely to access guaranteed solutions.
The historical examples he brings up to illustrate this are pretty fascinating. He talks about Booker T. Washington.
Oh, the peanut guy.
Yeah, exactly. Now, Washington famously developed over 200 different inventions and applications, from the peanut oils, cosmetics, dyes, agricultural solutions.
A massive output.
But the text zeroes in on his specific process. Washington reportedly said that every time he went into his laboratory, he didn't just look at his notes. He would worship, and he would study his Bible.
Interesting.
And suddenly, it was like a curtain opened, revealing exactly what the peanut could be used for. He didn't extract the innovation purely from a chemistry textbook. I mean, he extracted it from this inspired revelation.
Which aligns perfectly with the author's assertion that revelation is higher than education.
Say more about that.
Well, education gives you what is already known by the collective culture, right? It's just shared data. But revelation gives you what is currently hidden from everyone else.
Okay, I hear that, but let me push back a little on another example he uses, because it sounds almost too easy.
Sure.
He tells a story about a grandmother who was constantly frustrated while changing her daughter's baby's nappies. She was highly motivated to find a better way.
As any parent would be.
Right. And then, one night, she allegedly has a highly specific dream showing her exactly how to design a revolutionary diaper. She wakes up, creates it, and becomes a millionaire instantly.
Wow.
Just from one dream. Come on. I mean, ideas are cheap. Execution is everything. Is the book just glossing over the massive amount of work it takes to actually build a business?
It's a completely fair critique, and if you only look at the surface of the anecdote, it does sound like magical thinking.
Yeah, like you just sleep and get rich.
But let's look at the underlying psychological mechanism the author's pointing to. Why did she have the dream? Because she was highly motivated and entirely focused on the problem.
Okay, that's true.
The author points to specific environments that foster this state of inspiration. He emphasizes quieting the mind, intense worship, prayer that is an active listening dialogue rather than a monologue, and utilizing what he calls the night season.
Okay, the night season. That concept really caught my eye.
It's a big one.
The author explicitly points out that even people who don't know God-like, he mentions big-time secular businessmen, multimillionaires, they do their heaviest conceptual work at night.
Yes, they do.
If we connect this to the secular world, why is the night season so functionally crucial for high-level success?
It comes down to cognitive bandwidth and environmental noise. Think about your average day.
Chaos.
Total chaos. Your brain is processing millions of data points, emails pinging, traffic navigating, social media scrolling, office politics. The environmental noise is deafening.
Yeah, you can't even hear yourself think.
Exactly. Your conscious mind is entirely occupied with simply surviving the day. But at night, that external noise floor drops to zero.
Everything gets quiet.
The text talks about hearing the still, small voice. Psychologically speaking, when the conscious mind isn't busy putting out daily fires, the subconscious mind, which has been churning on your complex problems all day in the background, finally has the quiet space to push its solutions to the surface.
Wow.
The author frames this as a spiritual season of instruction, but the psychological truth embedded there is that profound quietness is a strict prerequisite for profound insight.
You literally cannot hear the solution over the noise of the problem. That makes total sense. But once you get that initial spark, whether it comes from a dream, a quiet night, or a moment in the lab, you have to actually do something with it.
Oh, absolutely. The spark alone is incredibly fragile.
Which brings us to the next critical phase, digestion, or as the author terms it, meditation.
Yes, because an inspired idea that isn't processed is just a fleeting emotional high. It has to be internalized.
Okay, let's unpack this. When you or I, or anyone listening, hears the word meditation, we almost universally picture the same thing.
Sitting cross-legged on a yoga mat.
Exactly. Closing our eyes and trying desperately to completely empty our minds. We try to think about absolutely nothing.
Which is very hard to do.
It is. But in this book, meditation is the exact polar opposite. It's not about emptying the mind. It is about actively, aggressively filling it.
Filling it with what?
Specifically, filling it with the Word of God, which the author describes as a wisdom bank.
It's an active mental focus. It's reasoning through the text, interrogating the idea, not just passively reading it or letting it wash over you.
Right. And he shares this incredibly relatable modern anecdote to explain why this matters. He talks about a time he was typing out a text message on his phone, trying to reply to someone's question.
We've all been there.
But as he was typing, his mind was wandering. He was internally stressing or thinking about something completely different.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. When he looked down at his phone, he realized his thumbs had accidentally typed out his internal wandering thoughts instead of the reply he intended to send.
Oh, that is a perfect metaphor for his core maxim.
Which is,
What goes into your mind determines what flows out of your life.
exactly. If your mind is full of anxiety, anxiety inevitably types itself out into your daily actions, your tone of voice, your business decisions.
It leaks out.
It totally leaks out. But if it's full of this wisdom bank, wisdom becomes your default output.
And he makes a brilliant biological distinction here between consumption and assimilation. He uses the analogy of eating raw beans.
Oh, I love this analogy. Break it down.
So he points out that if you just swallow a handful of hard raw beans, they just pass right through your digestive system.
Right, they do nothing for you.
They yield absolutely zero nutrients to your body. But if you take the time to apply heat to cook them, then your body can digest them, assimilate the nutrients, and the food actually profits you.
It's a highly visceral way to explain spiritual and mental digestion.
It really is.
Just reading a book, or scrolling through a motivational quote, or hearing a fact on a deep dive is swallowing raw beans.
Yes.
Meditation stopping to ask yourself, well, what does this actually mean for my specific situation? What's my personal responsibility based on this new information? That is the cooking process.
And this leads to a crucial, incredibly practical contrast the author makes between meditation and worry.
This is huge, because I think a lot of people confuse the two. Both of them involve thinking deeply and obsessively about something over and over again.
Precisely. The mechanical action of the brain is identical. You are looping thoughts. But the orientation of those thoughts is entirely opposite.
How's?
Worry, according to the text, is problem-centered thinking. You keep analyzing how massive the problem is, how unfair it is, how much it's going to hurt.
Yeah, just spiraling.
Right. Meditation, however, is solution-centered thinking.
So worry asks the universe, why am I still stuck in this horrible mess?
Yes.
But meditation asks, where is the specific mechanism or exit strategy to get out of this mess?
And that shift in framing physically changes the brain's entire orientation.
Yeah.
It moves you from a state of paralyzed panic, where your amygdala is just firing off threat warnings, into executive functioning and problem solving.
That is such a crucial distinction. But let me play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Let's say you've cooked the beans. You've meditated on the solution, you're focused on the exit strategy, and you still can't find the answer. You are completely stuck. What then?
That requires moving from internal reflection to external demand.
Which is the third phase, inquisition, or the art of asking questions.
This is a vital step because it breaks the illusion of self-sufficiency.
The core premise of this section is wonderfully blunt. The author states, those who do not ask questions do not deserve answers.
Harsh, but true.
It's like being in a massive university lecture hall, right? The professor has all the knowledge, but they don't just broadcast custom solutions to everyone automatically.
No, they respond to the student who actively raises their hand and asks a specific question.
Exactly.
It's a principle of active, almost aggressive engagement. An inquisitive mind is a probe-oriented mind. It assumes there is data missing.
And the mortal enemy of inquisition, according to the book, is assumption. There's a warning here that I think applies to literally every professional field, whether you're in tech, sales, or medicine.
Frustration is the outcome of assumption.
Yes. He uses the biblical story of David to make this point. David had just defeated his enemies using a very specific military strategy.
Okay.
But the next time the enemies attacked, David didn't just assume the old strategy would work again. He actually paused his entire military response. He inquired of God, and God told him, no, don't do it the same way. Wait until you hear the sound in the top of the mulberry trees.
What's fascinating here is the author's assertion that doing the same thing twice and expecting the exact same result is a massive failure of inquisition.
Why do you think we fall into that trap?
We tend to think that if a formula works, it's permanent. But the ways of success, or in his framework, the ways of God, are dynamic. They are highly contextual.
So what works today might fail tomorrow.
Exactly. A marketing strategy that brought you a massive company-saving win in 2022 might be the exact strategy that bankrupts you in 2026 if you just operate on assumption instead of continuing to ask high-level questions about the current landscape.
So if you're listening to this on your commute right now, ask yourself, are you just assuming today's meeting or this week's project will go exactly like last month's?
Probably.
Because Enenche is arguing that resting on past success and operating on assumption is exactly what breeds your current professional frustration.
It's a trap.
It is.
Yeah.
But I want to zero in on how we actually ask these questions. The author talks about separating yourself to intermeddle with wisdom. What does that actually look like in practice? Because, I can't just pause a boardroom meeting to go sit under a mulberry tree.
The author provides his own personal examples, which are quite intense and demand significant sacrifice.
Like what?
He talks about intentionally isolating himself for days before making massive structural life decisions, like choosing a spouse or deciding to officially launch his ministry. Yes. He didn't just casually mull it over while watching television or driving to the grocery store. He removed himself from his normal environment entirely.
He went into an isolated area, sometimes fasting, completely cutting off input, just to focus the entirety of his cognitive power on the question.
Exactly. And the psychological takeaway for you listening, even if you don't fast for 3 days, is the absolute necessity of structured, isolated time to ask high-level questions about life's puzzles.
You have to disconnect.
You simply cannot solve a deep existential puzzle while your phone is buzzing with group chats every 30 seconds. You have to enforce a physical and digital separation to lower the noise floor enough to actually hear the answer you were trying to find.
And asking those deep structural questions, if you actually take the time to do it, inevitably forces you to confront your ultimate trajectory, like where are you actually going?
Right.
Which is the perfect logical transition into the fourth concept, vision, the destined outcome.
Vision is the destination. It's the blueprint. If inquisition is asking for directions, vision is the map you draw with those answers.
The author makes a very bold categorical claim here. He says an aimless person is a wiseless person.
A wiseless person. I like that term.
Yeah. If you don't have a vision, you cannot possibly have wisdom, because wisdom is just the tool, the vehicle you use to get to your vision. If you have absolutely nowhere to go, you don't need a vehicle.
Right. An aimless person has no need for time management or financial discipline or strategic networking because literally any outcome is acceptable if you don't have a specific goal.
Exactly.
Vision is the focal objective that organizes a person's entire pursuit. It dictates what you say yes to, and more importantly, what you say no to.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because figuring out your vision sounds incredibly daunting. But the author shares an intensely personal, quite painful story about how his own vision was formed.
Oh, this part is powerful.
He was a very sickly child. He suffered from terrible, agonizing pains, constant convulsions, and strange, undiagnosable internal swellings.
That sounds awful.
His mother could barely hold down her job because she was always rushing home in a panic to care for him. It was a miserable, traumatic situation for a family. Yet this exact mess became the foundation for his entire future. He went on to study medicine to understand the body, and later built a massive healing ministry. The very thing that caused him his deepest misery became the absolute core of his ministry.
It's a profound, incredibly resilient psychological reframing.
It really is.
The text discusses the concept of hindsight as a primary source of vision. It posits that what you pass through becomes the exact tool for what will eventually pass through you to help others.
Wow.
Your misery of the past sponsors your ministry, or your business, or your advocacy of the future. The mess around you brings forth a unique message from within you.
That is such a powerful, redemptive way to process trauma or hardship. It completely removes the victim mentality.
Exactly. It flips the script.
It's not just pointless random suffering. It's the highly specific, rigorous training ground for your unique purpose.
It gives immense meaning to the struggle. If you suffered unusual poverty as a child, for instance, your adult vision might be to empower others into financial literacy.
Right.
If you struggled with severe dyslexia, your vision might be redesigning educational software. Your unique pain points you directly to your unique purpose.
But having a vision written down in a journal is one thing. Keeping it alive when the real world pushes back is another.
That is the hard part.
The book talks about vision boosters. These are mechanisms to keep the internal fire from going out. We have to continuously review the vision, literally write it down and look at it constantly to fight off amnesia.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. And then there's the absolute necessity of role models.
Yes, role model influence is critical here, but not in the way we usually think about it.
How so?
A mentor or role model isn't just someone who gives you a step-by-step tutorial on what to do. The author defines a role model as someone who gives you permission to fail.
I love that phrasing so much. Permission to fail. It completely changes the dynamic from a teacher grading a test to a veteran cheering on a rookie.
Because a true, massive vision requires terrifying risk. And if you are absolutely paralyzed by the fear that failing will permanently destroy your reputation, you will never take the necessary risk.
You'll just freeze.
Exactly. A role model stands there as living proof and says, look, I've been there, I've failed spectacularly, I survived the embarrassment, and you will too. Now get up and try again.
It is so freeing.
You also need a supportive daily environment. The text warns fiercely about dream killers, people who constantly ask cynical questions like, who do you know from our neighborhood that has ever achieved that?
Yes, those people.
If you are surrounded by skeptics, your vision will simply suffocate from a lack of oxygen.
And even with a clear vision and a great environment where people are cheering you on, getting to the finish line still requires a massive internal engine.
You can't just casually stroll there.
No, you can't just comfortably walk toward a massive vision.
Which leads us to the fifth phase, which might be my favorite redefinition in the whole book, desperation. Desperation is almost universally viewed negatively in our culture. We see it as a state of panic, weakness, or a lack of emotional control.
Right, like someone who is flailing.
But this book redefines it as a vital, highly concentrated, powerful force.
The text defines desperation as desire under pressure and desire beyond conviction. It's not just intellectually knowing what you want, it's wanting it so fiercely, so totally, that no one can convince you to settle for a backup plan.
You want it so badly you can physically feel it in your chest.
And the text attributes a literal magnetic gravitational power to this kind of concentrated desire.
Yes, the biblical interpretation here is fascinating. The author looks at the Old Testament story of the prophets Elijah and Elisha.
Yeah, I remember this one.
Elijah is being taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, and his protege, Elisha, is watching this happen. Elisha is screaming out to him desperately, single-mindedly wanting a double portion of his mentor's anointing.
Right.
As Elijah goes up, his physical mantle, his cloak, falls down to Elisha. The author asks a brilliant analytical question: what actually made the mantle fall?
And what's his answer?
He argues that Elijah didn't just casually drop it like a hand-me-down. He argues that the sheer concentrated desperation in Elisha's heart literally exerted a magnetic pull that dragged the mantle down from the sky.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, the principle is that what you desire, you attract. Desperation is a magnetic force that bends reality toward it.
Exactly.
Now, wait a minute. Let me stop you there. Because whenever I hear what you desire, you attract, my alarm bells go off.
I get that.
Is this just the secret? Is the author just pitching the law of attraction? Like, just think about a Ferrari really hard and it shows up in your driveway.
It's a great distinction to make. While it sounds similar to passive manifestation, the mechanism here is deeply psychological and active.
Okay, unpack that.
In psychology, we talk about the reticular activating system, or RAS, in the brain. It's the network that filters information.
Right, right.
When you are truly agonizingly desperate for a specific outcome like finding funding for your business, your RAS reprioritizes your subconscious. Suddenly, you notice an article or overhear a conversation in a coffee shop or see an opportunity that was always there, but your brain previously filtered it out as irrelevant noise.
Oh, wow.
Desperation doesn't magically summon a Ferrari. Desperation hyper-tunes your brain to execute on opportunities that a comfortable person entirely ignores. What you desire, you acquire, because desire dictates your absolute focus.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
The intensity of the focus changes the data you process. And conversely, as the book points out, if your heart dwells on empty, superficial matters, gossip, television, complaining, your life will be entirely empty.
Garbage in, garbage out.
The universe, or God, in the context of the book, responds to the density and weight of your desire. The quote is, "Heavy matters in the heart of a man cause him to matter heavily in his generation."
But the challenge is, how do you manufacture that level of desperation if you're currently just feeling comfortable or maybe a bit lazy and complacent?
Right. The author shares what sparked his own desperation, and it wasn't poverty. He talks about watching a VHS video of an old evangelist named A.A. Allen.
Okay.
Allen was just sitting calmly in a chair on a stage, pulling people out of wheelchairs. No sweating, no panic, no screaming, just effortless, massive results.
Wow.
The author also talks about a time he stood at the foot of the 60-story medical center at Oral Roberts University, just staring straight up at this colossal physical manifestation of one man's vision.
And this is a crucial insight into human motivation. Seeing others generate massive results effortlessly puts a person under pressure to succeed.
It creates a standard.
Exactly. It proves that desperation isn't only born from a lack of resources or from hitting absolute rock bottom. It can be born from exposure, from seeing what is truly physically possible for a human being to achieve.
It ruins your excuses.
It does. When you see someone else effortlessly doing what you are struggling to do, it entirely obliterates your internal excuses. It creates an insatiable hunger.
It's the difference between being hungry because you haven't eaten in 2 days and being hungry because you just walked into a Michelin star restaurant and smelled the most incredible steak of your life.
That is a great analogy.
One is driven by starvation, the other is driven by exposure to excellence.
Exactly. Assimilation from association. Passion, much like panic, is highly contagious.
But that means there is a massive flip side to this. If seeing others achieve great things fuels your desperation to succeed, then carefully, ruthlessly choosing who you look at and who you hang around is the most critical choice you make.
You cannot catch a fire from an ice cube.
You cannot. And that brings us to the stark, unforgiving warnings of the sixth concept: association, the company you keep.
This chapter is arguably the most practical, immediate, and honestly the most painful in terms of daily application. The company you keep dictates the absolute ceiling of your life.
The author lays down a very stark warning. He says your association affects your discretion and your destination. He uses a striking physical analogy. We've all heard the ancient proverb, iron sharpens iron.
It's a cliche at this point.
It is, but the author adds a devastating twist. He says, when iron sharpens wood, the wood will reduce in size and the iron will be blunt.
That is a brilliant, tactile metaphor for unequal, deeply mismatched partnerships.
Break it down for us.
If you pair a highly motivated, sharp, disciplined individual, the iron, with someone who has zero ambition, negative habits, and a cynical worldview, the wood, they do not balance each other out.
Right. They don't meet in the middle.
No. The iron loses its sharp edge trying to constantly hack through the other person's apathy, and the wood just gets whittled away to sawdust under the pressure of expectations they can't meet. They both lose because their fundamental materials are incompatible.
So how does the book define a true friend, a true iron companion? It's not just someone who gives you high fives and tells you you're great. A true friend is someone who is fundamentally not intimidated by your success.
Right. They don't get agitated or weirdly silent when you get a promotion. They don't engage you in petty, passive-aggressive competition or make derogatory, joking comments when you start winning in life.
More importantly, a true friend pushes you out of your comfort zone. And they love you enough to tell you the raw, unvarnished, ugly truth when you are making a mistake.
Which we all need.
We do. The author gives a great, highly contextual, practical example. A true friend is the person who will look you in the eye and tell you not to buy a 10 million Naira car if you are still living in a rented apartment.
Right. And to give some context to the global listener, Naira is the Nigerian currency. 10 million Naira represents a massively expensive, flashy luxury purchase.
A huge flex.
Exactly. The author is saying a true friend will stop you from buying a status symbol to look rich when you haven't even secured the foundational asset of owning your own home. They will tell you the financial truth, even when it hurts your ego. They actively fight mediocrity and bad discretion in your life.
So the author is teaching this intense concept of association to his congregation, and his 15-year-old daughter asks a brilliant, incredibly pragmatic question.
Kids always ask the best questions.
They really do. She essentially says, okay, Dad, if these are the required qualities of true friends, how do you actually get them? So the million-dollar question, where do you find these magical, perfectly supportive, truth-telling people?
And the author's answer is twofold and puts the responsibility entirely back on the listener.
What's the first part?
First, the law of attraction. You must be a friend. Like attracts like. If you want a friend who tells the truth, celebrates success, and pushes for excellence, you have to exhibit those exact traits yourself. You have to become the iron.
You can't be a cynical piece of wood and expect to magically attract a piece of iron to fix your life.
Precisely. You will only attract what you project. And the second rule is even more practical. He says, relationships require workmanships.
Workmanships, I love that term. It sounds like a trade you have to learn.
Because it is. It means you cannot be passive. You can't ignore emails, fail to return texts, cancel plans at the last minute, and expect to build a destiny-changing network.
You have to put in the reps.
You have to actively cultivate, invest in, and aggressively pursue high-quality people. If you see someone with the character and the results you desire, you don't just sit there waiting for them to notice your potential. You pursue the connection with workmanship.
But even the absolute best friends, the sharpest iron peers, only provide peer-level wisdom. They are standing right beside you.
Yep.
If you want to take a massive vertical leap forward in your capability, you need to submit to higher knowledge. You need to look up.
Which leads to the seventh phase, instruction, the cure for foolishness.
The author does not mince words here. He shares this incredibly blunt, almost offensive quote. He says, if you want to hide anything from a fool, put it inside a book.
It's harsh.
It is harsh, but it underscores a fundamental reality about human behavior and laziness. The hatred of instruction, the refusal to read, is the ultimate mark of a fool. Anyone who refuses to be taught is actively choosing stagnation.
The author's philosophy is that knowledge exists in quantifiable levels, and quality information naturally provokes quality decisions.
Okay, give us an example.
He uses an academic and professional example from the Nigerian education system that is very grounded. He talks about someone with an OND, an ordinary national diploma, which is like a basic associate's degree in accounting.
Right.
If that person does the grueling work, studies the books, and upgrades their knowledge to an HND, a higher national diploma, or goes all the way to becoming a chartered accountant, their workplace must elevate them.
They literally cannot keep you at the entry-level OND salary once you possess chartered executive-level knowledge. Your value in the marketplace is fundamentally altered.
Exactly. Knowledge literally forces progress. It breaks external barriers.
Yeah.
If you change your internal level of information, you force a change in your external results. As he puts it, illumination brings acceleration.
But it's not just about reading dry academic textbooks to get a certificate. The author specifically advises reading the masters.
Yes.
He says if you want to be a world-class software architect, read Bill Gates. If you want a master investment, read Warren Buffett. For real estate, Donald Trump. For massive organizational church growth, Bishop Oyedepo.
Go to the source.
Find the absolute undisputed authority in the specific field you want to dominate and let them instruct you through their books.
Because, as the text states, the secrets of men are in their stories.
So how do we actually do that? Because millions of people buy Warren Buffett's biographies and they don't become billionaires. What does reading actively mean, practically, for the listener?
It means you do not read a biography just to memorize dates, facts, or entertaining anecdotes. You read as an investigator trying to uncover the hidden mechanisms of a master's success.
You're looking for the code.
You are searching for the why behind their what. When Warren Buffett makes a weird counterintuitive investment, you stop reading and ask, what criteria did he use to make that specific decision when everyone else was panicking?
That makes a lot of sense.
When you figure out how a master makes decisions, you can adopt their cognitive framework and make their success your success.
You are basically downloading their operating system into your own brain. But books aren't the only texts we should be reading. The author argues that the entire physical world around us is a text waiting to be decoded.
Which brings us to the eighth concept, observation, the university of the universe.
This concept shifts the classroom from the quiet library to the loud, chaotic street. The premise is that the world itself is a relentless educational institution, constantly broadcasting lessons to anyone paying attention.
The author says that people who refuse to enroll in the university of the universe never graduate from the Institute of Failure.
It's all about having eyes that don't just mechanically look at objects, but actually see the underlying principles.
The failure of observation is the ultimate failure of discretion. Two people can look at the exact same mundane scenario. One learns a life-changing multi-million-dollar lesson, and the other just sees an annoyance.
The author shares some incredibly vivid, almost humorous analogies from his own daily observations. The first one is about a lizard. Have you ever just watched a lizard fall off a wall?
It happens quite often in tropical climates, yes. They lose their grip and just plummet.
Right. So the author observes this lizard fall from a great height onto the concrete. Now, the fall doesn't kill it. The lizard hits the ground hard, recovers, looks left, looks right, and sees that absolutely no one is clapping or praising it for surviving this massive fall.
No audience.
No audience. So what does the lizard do? It vigorously nods its own head, essentially validating itself, telling itself, I have tried, and then it just scurries off and keeps moving.
It's a brilliant, almost comical extrapolation.
It is.
But the psychological lesson extracted is profound for any professional or creative. Don't die because you fell. And more importantly, do not wait for external validation, applause, or praise to recover from a failure.
Just nod your own head.
Validate yourself, nod your own head, and keep moving forward. If you wait for the crowd to cheer your recovery, you will sit on the concrete forever.
He finds another lesson in a massive traffic jam in Abuja. For context, Abuja and Lagos are these incredibly intense, hyperdense, bustling metropolitan environments. Traffic there isn't just a delay, it's an existential crisis. Total gridlock.
It is famously bad.
He's sitting there, everyone is rushing, cars are wedged together, horns blaring, everyone completely stuck in the middle of the intersection. He looks at this absolute mess, and instead of just getting angry, he hears an internal instruction.
What was it?
Disorder is the foundation for stagnation. If your life, your business, or your desk isn't moving forward, something is fundamentally out of order.
And then there is the observation of the broken-down trailer. He's in Lagos, stuck in terrible, soul-crushing traffic, moving inches at a time for hours.
Sounds like a nightmare.
Eventually, they slowly pass the bottleneck, a massive broken-down trailer blocking 2 lanes. The moment they pass the cab of that truck, the road ahead is completely, beautifully wide open.
The lesson: keep moving. The front is free. No matter how congested, painful, and slow your current struggle is, no matter how many people are jammed up around you complaining, if you just keep pushing past the immediate blockage, there is open road ahead.
But we have to be clear. These observations aren't just for gathering cute metaphors to tell your friends. Observation is meant to breed deep, unshakable conviction. The principle is that what the eye repeatedly sees, the heart eventually believes.
This is where he tells the incredible story of T.L. Osborne. Osborne was an American evangelist who went to India in his early career and, by his own admission, failed completely.
Just 0 results.
He preached for 3 years, saw 0 converts, 0 impact, and returned home a depressed, miserable failure. But then, back in America, he goes to observe a young prophet ministering.
Notice the active choice there. He didn't just stay home and sulk. He deliberately placed himself in an environment to observe someone who was actively getting the exact results he wanted.
Right. And as Osborne sits in the crowd, he watches this young man perform miracle-straightening, crossed eyes, unstopping deaf ears. Osborne deeply observes this, and what his eyes see fundamentally alters his internal belief system.
The observation changes his reality.
He becomes absolutely convinced that if this young, ordinary man can do it, he can do it too. His head is suddenly filled with the voice saying, "You too can do this."
And then what?
So what happens? He goes back to India, the exact same geographic location where he previously failed. But this time, he is armed with an ironclad conviction born from observation. He gathers 50,000 people and sees massive, historic success.
It proves that observation isn't a passive hobby. It's a catalyst for complete internal transformation. But the author gives a very practical, almost mundane warning here. Human memory is incredibly fragile.
Oh, yes. The pen and paper rule. It sounds so basic, but it's everything.
Never go anywhere. Not a business meeting, not a seminar, not church, not even a walk without a pen and paper or a notes app on your phone.
Because you'll forget.
You absolutely will. Documentation is the necessary first step of observation because the act of writing it down forces your brain to crystallize the thought, doubling your retention. But documentation is useless without implementation. You observe and write it down not just to have a smart-sounding record, but to fundamentally change how you act the next day.
And observing the world is entirely passive until your brain actively, aggressively processes the data, which is the perfect segue into the 9th phase, the action of thinking, using your mental real estate.
This is where we talk about the actual mechanical engine of success.
So what does this all mean? We've talked about inspiration, meditation, and observing lizards in traffic. But it all hinges on the active, grueling, exhausting work of thinking.
Thinking is hard work.
It is. The author uses a catchphrase here that I think should be printed on a t-shirt. Spirituality is no excuse for stupidity.
It's a fantastic direct challenge to the idea that having faith means checking your intellect at the door and just waiting for miracles to happen.
He boldly claims that God gave man a brain to give God a rest.
The premise is that the mind is the central control room for the quality of a person's life and destiny. Great thinkers inevitably end up as outstanding successes. Non-thinkers inevitably end up as outstanding failures.
Right.
The book is arguing that you are not where you are because the economy is bad, or the universe is against you, or the devil is too powerful. You are exactly where you are based on the extent to which you have rigorously used your own mind.
He contrasts 2 very different states of mind to illustrate this. First, He paints this incredibly vivid picture of a madman he saw walking down the street.
Oh, the outfit.
Yes, the outfit. He describes the outfit perfectly, and it's wild. The man is wearing a bright red tie, a green shirt, a black suit jacket, purple-gray trousers rolled up to the knee on one side only, and sandals worn with thick socks.
It's a chaotic, completely mismatched image.
Honestly, it sounds like a runway look at Paris Fashion Week right now.
Yeah, it probably is. But in the context of the book, it's a tragic illustration of a loss of cognitive order.
Exactly. The point he's making isn't just to mock a mentally ill person's clothing. He's making a structural point that this person has lost their mind, their internal thought process. And because coherent thought is lost, all sense of quality, excellence, and order dies with it.
That's a strong point.
There can be no external quality where there is no internal mentality.
He applies this exact same principle to the business world, specifically customer service, comparing a high-end luxury hotel with a low-tier local hotel.
How does that play out?
At the high-end hotel, the moment you walk in, you are greeted warmly, your bags are taken, you are treated with dignity, because the staff from upper management down to the bellhop are actively, continuously using their minds to anticipate your needs and serve you.
But at the local hotel, the staff treat you like a zombie.
Yeah.
You walk up to the desk, ask for a room, and they just stare blankly and tell you to just stand there while they slowly flip through a ledger.
Zero active thought.
They are functioning purely on autopilot, completely unmindful of the dignity of the guest or the reputation of the business. The equation is simple. High mentality equals high quality. A zombie mind equals low quality.
This ties back beautifully to the earlier contrast between worry and meditation. A functional, thinking mind looks at a problem and asks, how do I engineer a bridge to get from here to there? A non-functional zombie mind just sits in the mud and whines, why am I still here?
But let me ask you this, because the author is very explicit about not dodging challenges.
Yeah.
He says that when you face a huge problem, you have to sit down and face it. And he calls it a grinding process.
Yes, he does.
Why use that specific word? I feel like modern psychology tells us to step away, take a walk, and avoid burnout. Why a grinding process? Is he just advocating for overwork?
He's not advocating for endless rumination or burnout, but he is being honest about the fact that true structural thinking is incredibly hard calorie-burning work. It's not passive daydreaming.
No.
When you face a massive, intimidating puzzle, like the biblical Daniel facing the king's forgotten dream, where his life literally depended on solving it, you don't run away, and you don't just take a nap. You sit down, you separate yourself from distractions, and you apply intense cognitive pressure.
So you force the issue.
Thinking is a grinding process because you are taking a massive, monolithic, terrifying problem and using your intellect to literally grind it down into smaller, manageable pieces.
You dissolve this terrifying boulder into molecules, then atoms, then electrons, until you can actually hold the specific actionable answer in the palm of your hand.
Precisely. You don't solve $1 million logistical problem all at once in a flash of lightning. You think your way through its component parts, systematically eliminating variables until the path clears.
Okay, so we have built this massive, complex engine of wisdom over 9 phases. We've talked about catching inspiration, building a vision, ruthlessly culling your associations, and grinding problems down through sheer thought.
The engine is ready.
But what happens when you have all the parts built? Your engine is perfectly tuned, but the battery is just dead. You need a spark from the outside. That is the 10th and final phase. Impartation. Catching what cannot be taught.
This is a significant pivot. The book moves from the highly cognitive and practical to the purely spiritual and relational within his specific framework.
The core concept here is that while certain elements of wisdom can be taught by instruction like reading Warren Buffett's books or observing a traffic jam, the ultimate, highest level of wisdom must actually be caught by impartation. It's contagious.
This raises a very important, highly abstract question. How does one actually mechanically catch a spiritual or psychological trait from another human being?
The author points to very specific physical mechanisms of transfer found in his tradition. He talks about the laying on of hands, like Moses physically laying his hands on Joshua to transfer the spirit of wisdom and leadership to the next generation.
Or the mantle.
Or using a physical object like a mantle, as we discussed with Elijah and Elisha. The underlying idea is that grace, or supreme wisdom, is literally transferable from one human spirit to another, almost like electricity flowing through a copper cable.
But the mechanics of this transfer require a highly specific internal posture from the receiver. You can't just walk up to a billionaire or a spiritual master and demand they zap you with their wisdom.
Right, that won't work.
The author emphasizes the absolute non-negotiable requirement of submission.
He uses a great visual. He says, the golden cup must bow to the tap. It doesn't matter if you are a golden cup, meaning you have a great degree, a high IQ, and a wealthy background. If you want the water, you have to physically lower yourself below the faucet.
It requires profound humility. You have to admit that despite your golden exterior, you are currently empty, and that the other person holds the water you desperately need. In physics and in this philosophy, everything flows from a higher elevation to a lower elevation.
Which leads to a really profound, very practical warning about the danger of overfamiliarity with your mentors. He says that the exact day your mentor becomes your casual friend, their grace completely ceases to profit you.
Because friendship implies a relationship on an equal, horizontal level. If you start looking at your mentor as just a buddy, an equal, you instantly lose the posture of submission.
You're no longer bowing to the tap.
You stop being the empty cup bowing below the tap, and you just become two cups sitting next to each other on the counter. Overfamiliarity blocks the transfer of wisdom because it breeds a casual, dismissive attitude toward their instruction.
It's that feeling of, oh, I know how he thinks. I've heard this story 100 times before. That sentence is the sound of overfamiliarity, and the very moment you think that, you close the lid on your cup. You stop catching the impartation.
It's a fascinating relational dynamic. To continuously receive the highest level of wisdom from a master, you must consciously maintain a certain respectful distance, a deep reverence for the source of their knowledge. The moment you lose the reverence, you lose the access.
So we've laid out all 10 phases. We've built the engine. We've jump-started the battery with impartation. We have the roadmap to becoming a principal person. And then, literally, at the very end of the book, the author takes a dramatic, incredibly sudden turn.
Yes, the section he titles The Very, Very Important Conclusion.
It's like a sudden shift in the room's gravity. For 10 phases, we've been talking intensely about earthly success. How to be a standout person, how to build a business, how to solve massive problems, how to outthink your competitors. And then, in the final pages, he pivots completely from earthly, temporal stakes to eternal, cosmic stakes.
He introduces the terminal nature of human life as the ultimate, inescapable framework for everything that preceded it. The defining quote of the conclusion is, "Death is not the end of life."
From a neutral, analytical perspective, what is he structurally doing to the reader here? Why build up all this success just to talk about death?
He is presenting the ultimate foundational motivation behind his entire philosophy. He is arguing that all the wisdom, all the wealth, all the trophies, and all the success you might gather using these 10 secrets mean absolutely nothing. They are mathematically reduced to zero if they do not align with eternity.
How?
He is contextualizing earthly success not as the final goal, but as a temporary high-stakes assignment. If you aggressively use the 10 secrets to become a billionaire, but end up in a regrettable eternity, the entire pursuit was, ironically, the ultimate act of foolishness.
He strips away all the accolades and leaves the reader with a final checklist of intensely probing existential questions. Who are you actually living for? What are the controlling desires of your private life? What is your public testimony when no one is watching your success? Does God know you as his own?
And finally, he issues a direct call to accept the lordship of Jesus Christ. This conclusion retroactively colors every single chapter of the book.
It reframes everything.
It reveals that the pursuit of being a principal person isn't about feeding your ego or simple, selfish wealth accumulation. In this specific worldview, it's about maximizing your earthly potential to serve a divine purpose before your extremely limited time runs out.
It's the overarching cosmic worldview that powers the entire engine he just spent the book building. All right, we have spent the last hour doing a massive deep dive into the hidden mechanics of wisdom.
We really covered a lot of ground.
We've explored how to find inspiration in the noise, how to ask the terrifying questions, how to ruthlessly select your friends, and how to grind a seemingly impossible problem down into atoms through sheer focused thought. We've talked about how to accumulate this wisdom so you can become a principal person, a standout, undeniable success in your generation.
But there's one more thing to consider.
Exactly. I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. Consider this. If wisdom is truly transferred by observation, by association, and by impartation, as the author so strongly argues, then your personal percent of wisdom isn't just about your success.
It's bigger than that.
It's not just about your bank account or your trophy. Your level of excellence, your commitment to grinding through the agonizing problems, actually becomes the environment, the instruction, and the impartation for the people observing you.
You become the textbook.
Yes. If you choose to remain foolish, if you refuse to enroll in the University of the Universe because it's too hard, you don't just hurt yourself. You rob the next generation of a master to study.
We all start as the soft wood looking for iron or the empty golden cup bowing to the tap. But eventually, if you apply these phases, the goal is to become the iron for someone else, to become the tap.
Exactly. So tomorrow morning when you step out your front door, remember the X-ray machine. The mechanics of human success might seem like muddy, chaotic waters, but the structural patterns are there if you're willing to actually look. Observe the world closely today. See the trailer blocking the road. Watch the lizard fall from the wall and nod its head. Keep your pen handy. Write down what the universe is trying to teach you, and join us next time for another deep dive.